The morning of the Beaumont wedding arrived the way all mornings do in Burgundy in late September, quietly, without apology, with the kind of light that makes everything look older and better than it is. It came over the vineyards first, then the low hills behind the chateau, then the stone chapel at the edge of the formal garden, where the ivy had been growing for so long it had begun to look less like decoration and more like the wall itself had decided to bloom. Margot Delacroix arrived at the chateau at 9:30. She came alone, in a dress that was 3 years old but still good, carrying a small bag with a broken clasp she kept meaning to fix. Her aunt, Celeste, had sent the invitation in June with a handwritten note tucked inside that said, "You must come. Do it for me. The food will be wonderful." Margot had read the note twice, put it on her kitchen table, and left it there for 3 weeks, while she decided whether or not she was the kind of person who could attend a wedding that summer without embarrassing herself. She decided, eventually, that she was. She had been many kinds of person in her 24 years, and this was simply the newest kind. The grounds of the Château de Beaumont were exactly as impressive as grounds belonging to a chateau should be: long gravel paths, rose bushes cut into perfect shapes that no rose bush would ever choose for itself, fountains, white chairs arranged in rows before the chapel, women in hats that had been chosen with a very specific kind of effort, the effort of appearing not to have tried, men in dark suits talking in groups of 3 and 4, the way men at weddings always did, about something that was definitely not the wedding. Margot found her aunt near the fountain and kissed her on both cheeks. "You look wonderful," Celeste said, in the tone of a woman who meant it, but was also a little surprised. "You look the same," Margot said, which was true and which was the best possible thing she could have said, because Celeste was 62 and proud of it. Her aunt took her arm and walked her toward the seating arrangement posted near the chapel door. The list was long. The Beaumont family had many friends, and the kind of friends who brought other friends, and those friends had apparently brought their cousins, and so the list went on for 2 full sheets of cream paper pinned to a small wooden board. Margot found her name near the bottom of the second sheet. Table 14. Inside, near the kitchen corridor. "It is a perfectly lovely table," Celeste said firmly, in the voice she used when something was not lovely at all. "Very central." "It is very close to the kitchen," Margot said. "All the best food comes from the kitchen." Margot smiled. Her aunt patted her arm and was immediately swept away by a woman in a green dress who appeared to have a great deal to tell her about something urgent. Margot stood alone on the gravel path, holding her bag with the broken clasp, and looked at the chapel. It was old. Stone, the kind of old that had weight to it, not just years but events, promises, the residue of everything that had ever been spoken inside it and taken seriously. The ivy on its west wall had turned red at the edges, the particular red of September, which was one of the things about Burgundy that Margot loved, without being able to explain why. She had been engaged to be married once. She did not think about it all the time, only sometimes. Only on days like today, when she was standing in front of a chapel in the September light, and she could feel, not exactly pain, but the shape of where something had been before it wasn't anymore. Like pressing on a bruise that had faded. You could still feel where it had been, even when it no longer hurt. His name had been Luke. He had been kind. He had been, she had thought, honest. They had been engaged for 8 months, and then one morning she had woken up and the engagement had been over, which is a clean way of saying something that had not been clean at all. She was 24. That had been 2 years ago. She was fine. She smoothed her dress and went to find her seat. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that ceremonies are when you are watching someone else's happiness from a polite distance. The bride was glowing. The groom looked like a man who had just been told the most important news of his life and had not yet decided how to feel about it, which was perhaps the most honest expression you could wear at an altar. The priest spoke in a low, unhurried voice. The guests were still. Margot sat in her chair and watched the light move through the chapel windows and land on the stone floor in long, pale rectangles. She thought about the dress she had worn to her own engagement dinner. It had been blue. She had thought it was the right choice at the time. Halfway through the ceremony, something tightened in her chest. She recognized it. She had been expecting it, in the way you expect weather. You can see the clouds coming from a distance, and then they are here, and there is nothing to do but wait for them to pass. She breathed slowly. She looked at the stained glass above the altar. She counted the colors: blue, red, gold, white. A small square of green she could not identify from where she was sitting. The tightening did not ease. She stood carefully, making herself as small as possible, and slipped out of the chapel during a piece of music that was loud enough to cover the sound of a chair scraping, and a door opening, and one person walking across gravel, trying not to cry. Behind the chapel, no one was. That was the whole point of going there. The garden ended at the chapel's west wall, and beyond it was a small, unused courtyard with a stone bench and a door that had not opened in years, and the ivy that had turned red. No guests, no music, or only faintly. The sound of the fountain from far enough away that it was more texture than sound. Margot sat on the bench. She did not decide to cry. It simply happened, the way it always happened, quietly, efficiently, without any of the drama that crying was supposed to involve. Her eyes filled, her throat closed. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and looked at the ivy, and waited for it to be over. She had become very good at waiting for things to be over. She did not hear him coming. Later, she would try to remember the exact moment she understood she was not alone, and she would not be able to identify it. One moment there was only the bench and the wall and the faint sound of the fountain, and then there was also a man, standing 6 feet away with his hands in his pockets, looking at her with an expression that was not pity, and was not embarrassment, and was not the particular discomfort that people wear when they have accidentally witnessed something they did not mean to. He was simply looking at her, as if she were a person who was allowed to be doing what she was doing. He was tall, dark suit, dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, in a way that was clearly not a choice he had made, but which suited him anyway. He was standing very still, the way people stand when they are trying to take up as little space as possible, which was a peculiar quality in a man who was clearly accustomed to taking up a great deal of it. Margot looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. This went on for longer than it should have, and then she realized her face was wet, and she looked away at the ivy instead, which was less complicated. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was low. Not apologetic, more like careful. "I was not looking for company. I appear to have found some anyway." "So did I," Margot said. Another pause. "I can go," he offered. "You don't have to." He did not go. He crossed the courtyard in 3 steps and sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving more than enough space between them, and looked at the same wall she was looking at. The ivy was, objectively, not very interesting, but they both looked at it for a while. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and produced a handkerchief. He held it out to her without looking at her directly, the way you offer something to a person when you want them to be able to say no without it being awkward. It was old linen, white, monogrammed with a single letter she did not try to read. She took it. She pressed it against her face. It smelled like cedar and clean cloth, and something else she could not name. Something that was simply the smell of a thing that had been kept carefully for a long time. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, said nothing. They sat. The music from the chapel drifted around the corner of the wall and reached them in pieces. A chord. Silence. Another chord. From somewhere in the garden, the sound of a bird she could not identify. The fountain. The red ivy doing nothing. Being ivy. "Is it the wedding?" he asked. "Or something older?" She turned to look at him. He was looking at the wall, and he had the kind of face that had learned not to give much away, but there was something in the question itself that was different from the questions people usually asked her when they caught her in moments like this. People usually asked if she was all right. Or they asked nothing and waited for her to reassure them. This was neither of those things. "Something older," she said. He nodded, as if this made complete sense, which was the correct response, because it made complete sense. "You don't have to tell me what it is," he said. "I know," she said. She did not tell him, but she told him the shape of it, the way you can describe a room without naming what happened inside it. She told him that she had expected something once, that the thing she had expected had not come, that she was fine, mostly, and that the mostly was doing quite a lot of work in that sentence, and that she had not admitted the second part to anyone before, including herself. He listened. He did not interrupt her. He did not rush to fill the silences. He did not look at her with the particular expression that people wear when they are already composing their reply, before you have finished speaking. He simply listened, looking at the wall, and when she stopped speaking, he was quiet for a moment longer, as if he was making sure she was truly finished before he responded. "That is a hard kind of loss," he said. "The kind without a clear shape." "Yes," she said. "Exactly that. Most people don't know what to do with it. Most people try to talk me out of it." "That sounds exhausting," he said. She laughed. One short, genuine sound that surprised her. "It is," she said. "It really is." He smiled. Not a large smile. The kind that appears and is gone before you can quite confirm you saw it. But she saw it. "I am Margot," she said. "Edouard," he said. They did not shake hands. They did not need to. There are people you can sit behind a chapel wall with for 20 minutes and be introduced to afterward, and it does not feel like a contradiction. After a while, the music inside the chapel changed to something louder and celebratory, which meant the ceremony was ending. Margot folded the handkerchief in her lap. She did not know what the correct etiquette was for a borrowed handkerchief you had cried into. She had used things that were not hers before, and always felt slightly strange about giving them back. "I should go back in," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "I should as well." Neither of them moved immediately. "Will you be all right?" he asked. "I always am," she said. Then, because that sounded more certain than she felt, "I will be." He stood. He offered her his hand to help her up from the bench, which was a very old-fashioned gesture, and also a very useful one, because the bench was low and her heels were impractical choices for a stone courtyard. She took his hand. It was a firm, brief contact, the kind that does not try to be more than it is. She offered him back the handkerchief. He looked at it. "Keep it," he said. "I don't need it anymore." "Keep it anyway," he said, with the tone of a man who was not making a grand gesture, just a practical one. Or perhaps both. It was hard to tell. She put it in her pocket. They walked around the corner of the chapel wall separately, a few seconds apart, and rejoined the stream of guests flowing out of the chapel and into the garden for the reception, and nobody looked at either of them in a way that suggested they had noticed anything at all. The reception was held in the garden and in the long dining hall that opened onto it through a row of glass doors. There were tables with flowers and bottles of wine and plates of small, beautiful things to eat. There was music from a quartet in the corner, playing the kind of music that makes people feel that life is, on the whole, worth the trouble. There were photographs being taken near the fountain, children running in directions that alarmed their parents, old men sitting in comfortable chairs with glasses of something amber, talking slowly and with great satisfaction about things that had happened decades ago. Margot found her table near the kitchen corridor. Table 14 was exactly as described. Small, round, slightly in the shadow of a pillar, with a view of the kitchen door swinging open and shut as waiters moved in and out. Her chair wobbled slightly on one leg. The champagne in her glass was warm. She drank it anyway. The other guests at table 14 were pleasant people who meant well, and who talked about real estate and children and the school their children went to, and the other school their friends' children went to. And Margot smiled, and responded appropriately, and ate 3 of the small, beautiful things from the plates that circulated past her table, and thought about nothing in particular. Around the 3rd glass of wine, she looked up and found Edouard across the garden. He was standing with a group of older men near the far wall, and he was listening to one of them with the expression of a man who had been listening to this particular person for many years and had long ago made peace with that fact. He held his glass at his side. He was taller than the men around him, though that was not why he was easy to find in a crowd of 100 people. It was something else, some quality of stillness. He happened to look up at the same moment she was looking at him. Neither of them waved. Neither of them looked away. Exactly. They simply acknowledged that they could see each other, which was different from waving and different from looking away. And then they both returned to their respective conversations. And Margot turned back to the man at her table, who was explaining a planning dispute with the intensity of someone describing a natural disaster. An hour later, she went to find a quieter corner of the garden and discovered that she had apparently found the same corner that Edouard was also looking for. He was standing near a low stone wall covered in climbing roses that had finished blooming and were now simply green, holding a fresh glass of wine. And he looked at her when she appeared and did not look surprised. "This seems to be a pattern," she said. "It appears we favor the same corners," he agreed. There was a small iron table nearby, with 2 chairs that had been arranged as if someone had predicted they would need them. They sat down. A waiter appeared almost immediately with bread and butter and a small plate of things neither of them had asked for, and then disappeared again. The music from the quartet drifted across the garden, warmer now, a little slower. The light was changing, going from the sharp gold of late morning into the softer gold of early afternoon, the kind that made the limestone walls of the chateau look as though they were lit from inside. "You are not sitting with your group," Margot said. "I don't have a group," he said. "I have obligations. There is a difference." "What is the obligation today?" "The Beaumont family and my family have been connected for 4 generations," he said. "I come to these things. I am present. I drink their wine. I speak to their guests. I go home." That sounds very organized. It is very organized. Organization keeps things from becoming complicated. Does it work? He considered the question more seriously than she had expected. "Mostly," he said finally. She recognized the word from her own earlier use of it, and almost said so, but decided against it. Instead, she said, "My aunt invited me because she felt guilty about something she did not do wrong." What did she not do? She married someone wealthy when my family did not. She has spent 20 years trying to compensate for a thing she should not need to compensate for. And you let her? She is my aunt. She loves me. The compensating makes her feel useful. I find it easier to let her. He looked at her. That is either very kind, he said, or very practical. I think they are the same thing, Margot said, when the person is someone you love. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, I think you are right." They ate the small things from the plate the waiter had left. Margot realized after a moment that she was hungry, and that she had been too nervous that morning to eat breakfast, and that food was solving a problem she had not known she had. She ate more of the small things. Edouard watched her eat without comment, which she appreciated, and then poured more wine into her glass without asking, which she also appreciated. "Do you live in Paris?" he asked. "I live in Paris," she said. "I did not grow up there." "Where did you grow up?" "Near Beaune. Half an hour from here." She looked at the vineyard that was just visible over the far wall. "I can see this kind of light from my kitchen window when I go back to visit my mother. It is one of the things I did not know I would miss when I left." "Why did you leave?" "Work, and the particular restlessness of being 22 and convinced that the rest of your life was somewhere else." "Was it?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I haven't finished." He smiled again. "The real one, this time, not the small, gone before you could confirm it version, but a real one, which changed his face in a way that was entirely unexpected. It made him look, for a moment, like someone much younger than the man who had been standing with the older guests across the garden. Like someone who was allowed to simply be somewhere, instead of being present for a reason. "I grew up not far from here as well," he said. "I have not had the restlessness problem. I have had the opposite problem." "What is the opposite problem?" "Knowing exactly where you are supposed to be," he said, "for your entire life, without ever having been asked." She heard something in that sentence that was not a complaint, but was something adjacent to one. The sound of a person stating a fact they have been stating quietly for a long time. She did not press it. She let it sit, the way he had let her things sit. "Is that difficult?" she asked, after a moment. "It is what it is," he said. She looked at him sharply. He noticed. "What?" "That is my expression," she said. "I say that about things I have decided to accept without fully accepting." He looked slightly amused. "Perhaps we borrowed it from the same place." "Perhaps." They sat for a while longer. The afternoon arranged itself around them. The noise of the party, the music, the children now apparently having discovered the fountain and being redirected by 4 increasingly frantic adults. Margot watched all of it with the comfortable distance of someone who had no responsibility for any of it, which was one of the better feelings available at other people's weddings. Then a woman appeared at their table. She was perhaps 60, possibly 65. She wore a dress the color of old cream and pearls that had not been bought for effect, but for the simple reason that she wore pearls, had always worn pearls, and would continue wearing them because that was who she was. Her posture was the kind that was not learned in classes but inherited through generations of being the person in the room who did not need to announce herself. She looked at Edouard, then at Margot, then at Edouard again. "You are not where I expected you to be," she said to him. "I found better company," he said. His tone had not changed in any way Margot could identify, and yet something about it had shifted slightly. Not defensive, not guarded, simply aware. the way people's voices shift when they are speaking in a context that has history in it. The woman looked at Margot directly. Not rudely, not warmly either, with the specific look of a woman who had spent a great many years reading people quickly and accurately, and was currently doing exactly that. Margot looked back at her. She kept her chin level. She kept her expression open. Something in the woman's face changed, very slightly, and she said, "I see," in a tone that contained an entire conversation. Then she looked at her son once more. Margot was quite sure by now that this was his mother, and said, "Don't be late for the speeches." Then she walked away with the walk of someone who has said everything she needed to say. Silence at the small table. "She is not alarming," Edward said. "I know," Margot said. He looked at her. "You were not?" "I was not," she said. And then, honestly, she reminded me of someone I respect. The kind of person who tells you the truth with their expression because they find words inefficient. He looked at her for a long moment. "That is the most accurate description of my mother anyone has ever given me," he said, "in my presence or otherwise. How many people would give it outside of your presence?" "That is the better question," he agreed. The speeches were long and affectionate, and one of them made people cry in the good way, which Margot appreciated, and one of them made people laugh in the way that required no translation even for the guests who had not known the couple long. Margot stood near the back of the crowd gathered on the garden terrace and listened, and twice she heard Edward say something low and dry to the man standing beside him that made the man exhale through his nose, which was the highest form of humor at events like this. After the speeches, the party opened into the late afternoon with the kind of ease that good parties have, the formal structure dissolving, people wandering, conversations happening in the corners and near the fountain and along the garden paths. Someone had brought a dog, which was not officially permitted and was universally welcomed. The quartet shifted to something slower, and some people danced on the terrace, and some people drifted toward the vineyard path at the edge of the property that led between the rows of vines down toward the lower field. Margot drifted toward the vineyard path. She was not looking for solitude this time. She was simply looking at the light, which had gone from afternoon gold to something warmer and more horizontal. The particular light of early evening in September, when it comes across the tops of the vines and makes everything it touches look briefly, impossibly beautiful. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her, and did not turn around, because she already knew. "You find the same places," Edward said. "So do you," she said. He came to stand beside her at the edge of the vineyard. The rows of vines ran down the slope in long, even lines, and the leaves were turning at their edges, going from green to yellow to that particular red gold that is the last thing they do before they fall. The grapes had been harvested already. The vines were empty of fruit, only the leaves remaining, and they moved very slightly in the evening air. They stood and looked at it. "Tell me something," Margot said. "What would you like to know?" She thought about it. "What you would have done," she said, "if you had not had the life that was decided for you." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was taking the question seriously. "I would have studied architecture," he said. "I was good at it. I had a talent for understanding how spaces hold people. What makes a room feel like a room instead of just a box?" He paused. "I was 12 when I understood that this was not what I would do. I was not angry about it. I simply understood." "Were you angry later?" "Sometimes, in specific moments." He looked at the vineyard. "Not at anything I could point to, more at the shape of things." "The shape of things," she repeated. "Yes." She understood exactly what he meant. She did not say this, because she thought he already knew she understood, and saying it would be filling in a silence that did not need to be filled. "What would you have done?" he asked. She had not expected him to turn the question back. She thought about it. "I wanted a garden," she said. "Not flowers. Vegetables. Mostly. Herbs. The kind of things you can eat. My grandmother had one behind her house in Beaune, and I used to spend hours in it when I was young, not working in it particularly, just sitting in it, knowing things were growing." She paused. "It sounds very small." "It doesn't sound small at all," he said. "I also wanted the window," she said. "A specific window. Morning light, east-facing. The kind where you can have your coffee and see exactly what kind of day it is going to be before you have to go into it." "Where is this house?" "It doesn't exist," she said. "I have an apartment in Paris with one window that faces a wall." "The wall faces east?" he asked, very seriously. She laughed. "It does not." "Then we need to find you a different wall," he said. It was a light thing to say, a simple thing, and yet it sat strangely in the air between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted, as if it meant more than the words it was made of. She looked at him. The light was doing something extraordinary to the vineyard, turning the rows of vines into long lines of gold and shadow, and to the air, which had gone from warm to the particular temperature that is the last warmth of the day before the evening comes in, and to the man standing beside her, who was looking at the vines and whose face, in this light, was different from the face she had seen across the garden at a crowded reception, controlled and pleasant and carefully public. This was a different face, or perhaps the same face, with less of the careful part. She turned back to the vines. "I should tell you something," he said. "All right. When I told you my name earlier, I told you only part of it." She waited. "I am Edouard de Verneuil," he said, "the Duke of Verneuil. My family has held the title for 6 generations." She was quiet. "I do not tell people this at the beginning," he said, without apologizing for it, which she appreciated. "I find it changes things before there are things to change. I wanted to know what this was before—" He stopped, started again. "I wanted to know what this was." She stood very still, looking at the vineyard. There was a part of her that had already half known this. Not the specific title, but something like it. He moved in a way that people move when they have spent their lives being aware of what a room does when they walk into it. When the older man at the reception had spoken to him, the conversation had moved differently than most conversations move. His mother wore her pearls the way a person wears a position, not an accessory. She had half known. And yet there is knowing, and there is knowing. There is information received as fact, and information received as weight. And this was the second kind, settling over the afternoon and changing the quality of it slightly, the way a cloud changes the quality of light without making it dark. She thought about Luke, who had been kind, who had told her things about himself gradually, over months, and each new thing had been a real thing, and she had trusted each one. And then one morning, the real things had all turned out to be incomplete, and the incomplete parts were the important parts. And she had stood in her kitchen in Paris at 22, holding her coffee cup and understanding what a fool looked like from the inside. She had promised herself things after that morning. Quiet promises, not dramatic ones, small calibrations. She turned to look at Edouard. His face was still, not braced exactly, more like settled, as if he had said the thing he needed to say and was now waiting to see what would happen to it, without trying to control what happened. "Why now?" she asked. Because we are about to walk back, he said, and I did not want you to hear it from someone else and feel that I had withheld it. Is there a difference? I think so, he said. I hope so. She looked at him for a moment longer, reading the stillness of his face, the quality of his waiting. Then she looked back at the vineyard. It changes things, she said. I know. I do not like it when things change without my permission. I know that too, he said. I am sorry. Not sorry for who he was, she understood. Sorry for the way the information arrived. Too late to be ordinary, too early to be irrelevant. Sorry that there was no clean way to tell someone something like this that did not also change the color of everything that came before it. She reached into her pocket. She took out the handkerchief. She held it in her hand for a moment, looking at the monogrammed letter. A large, formal E, the kind that was stitched by hand. Old linen, old family. She had been carrying it in her pocket for 6 hours, and she had not thought about it until now, and now she thought about it very much. She handed it back to him. He looked at it. Keep it. I gave it back to you once already, she said. You told me to keep it. I am telling you again. That was before I knew it had a title. Something shifted in his expression, a very slight movement at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. The handkerchief does not have a title, he said. I do. The handkerchief is simply cloth. She looked at him. He looked at her. She put it back in her pocket. They stood for another moment in the last of the afternoon light, and then she said, I need to think. Of course. I do not mean this moment. I mean that I am the kind of person who needs to think. I understand, he said. I am also that kind of person. Good. She looked at the vineyard one more time. Then we understand each other on that point, at least. They walked back through the formal garden in the early evening, the light going soft and purple at the edges now, the roses dark against the stone walls. The party was still happening. Music, voices, the sound of someone laughing near the fountain. They reached the terrace, and she went left toward her aunt, and he went right toward his obligations, and the distance between them opened naturally, without drama. Her Aunt Celeste was standing near the rose wall with 2 other women, all of them holding glasses and talking with the particular animation of women who have known each other long enough to skip the beginning parts of every story. Celeste looked at Margot, and then past her at where Margot had come from, and then back at Margot. Where were you? She asked. The vineyard path, Margot said. With? Margot picked up a glass of champagne from a passing tray. It was cold this time. Someone had clearly made an effort. A man I met behind the chapel this morning, she said. Celeste stared at her. Margot drank her champagne. Margot, Celeste said carefully, who is this man? His name is Edouard, she said. He was avoiding the reception line. Edouard, her aunt repeated. At a Beaumont wedding. Something was happening behind her eyes, the rapid cross-referencing of a woman who knew this world and its inhabitants. Margot, she said slowly. Was it a tall man? Dark hair? Very quiet, Margot offered. I was going to say significant, Celeste said. But yes, quiet as well. She put her hand on Margot's arm. Do you know who he is? He told me, Margot said. I am still deciding what I think about it. Her aunt was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, Is he kind? Yes, Margot said, without hesitating. She had not expected to answer that quickly, but it was true, and it was the first true thing, and the other things, the title, the estate, the 6 generations, the mother with the pearls, were real things but secondary things. things that decorated the edge of the first true thing. "That is the important part," Celeste said. "I know," Margot said. "I know it is." She found him again, near the end of the evening. The reception was winding down in the way good parties wind down. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a tide going out. People departing in ones and twos. The music quieter, the candles lower, the children asleep in chairs or being carried by parents whose formal posture had entirely given way to the practical business of transporting a sleeping person. The bride and groom had disappeared an hour ago in a cloud of good wishes and rose petals, and the party was now in the comfortable, shapeless hour that belongs to the guests who are not quite ready to leave. He was standing near the door to the dining hall, not inside and not outside, a man who was not fully in any room he occupied. She had noticed this about him, the slight quality of observer that he wore, the sense of watching rather than participating. Even when he was participating, she wondered if he was aware of it, or if it had simply become the way he moved through things. She walked toward him. He saw her coming and did not pretend he hadn't. "You are still here," he said. "So are you," she said. They stood near the door together. Inside the dining hall, two old men were still at their table with their amber glasses. Near the fountain, a small group was saying the long goodbyes that happen at the end of events when people have remembered that they like each other and are reluctant to go back to the ordinary distance. "I have been thinking," she said. "Already?" he said. "It has been an hour." "I am a fast thinker," she said. "About some things." He waited. "I think," she said carefully, "that I have spent 2 years being very sensible, very careful, very good at protecting something I was not entirely sure was worth protecting." He did not rush her. "And I think," she continued, "that this is a strange day, that it began badly, behind a chapel wall, and that it has been getting consistently less bad in a direction I did not predict." She paused. "I am aware that this is one afternoon. I am not a person who makes large decisions based on one afternoon. Neither am I," he said. "But I am also not a person," she said, "who pretends that one afternoon was nothing when it was clearly something." He looked at her. There was something in his face that was not the controlled, pleasant expression of the reception, and not the still, waiting face on the vineyard path. It was something else. Something she did not have a name for yet, but recognized as the expression of a person who is about to say something they have not said in a long time. "I would like to know you," he said. "Not—" He stopped. He started again, and she thought of the vineyard and the way the light had touched his face, and she let him start again without interrupting him. "I would like to know you for a long time. I would like that to have a proper shape to it. An official shape." Another pause. "I am aware that I am saying this very badly." "You are saying it well," she said. "You are just not saying it smoothly." "No," he agreed. "I am not. I prefer it," she said. He looked at her. "If you had said it smoothly," she said, "I would have been less sure of it. Smooth things have been practiced. This has not been practiced." "It has not," he confirmed. She looked at him for a long moment. The last of the candles, the sound of the fountain, the old men with their glasses, the evening going dark at the edges of the garden. "All right," she said. He blinked. "All right? All right," she said again. "To knowing each other for a long time, with a proper shape." She looked at the garden. "I reserve the right to think about it more." "Of course," he said. "And to change my mind about specific parts. Also, of course. And I want to meet your mother properly," she said. "Not at a wedding where she is reading me like a document." He was quiet for a second. Then, she read you correctly, I think. Probably, Margot said. I would still like to have a conversation she does not win in 2 looks. He made the sound that had happened earlier at the reception, the exhaled breath that was his version of laughing. She had not expected to hear it twice in one day. They went back into the party for the last hour of it. Not together. Or rather, not obviously together. Not yet. There was no announcement. Nobody was told. The bride and groom were already gone, and the evening had lost its center, and the remaining guests were in their own conversations, and their own corners, and their own ends. But at some point, Margot was standing with her aunt, and she looked across the room, and Edouard looked back at her. And his mother was beside him, and she was looking at Margot, and she gave one single small nod, and then looked away. Celeste, who had seen all of this, said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "The food was wonderful, wasn't it?" "Excellent," Margot said. "I told you." "You did." Her aunt took her arm and held it. Not dramatically, just held it, the way you hold the arm of someone you love when you are happy for them, and you want them to feel that you are happy without making it a large thing, because some things are better when they stay small. Margot reached into her pocket with her free hand and touched the corner of the handkerchief. It was still there. Of course it was. She had known it would be there. She had put it there herself, twice, and it had stayed both times. Outside, the night had come in properly now. The last of the evening light gone over the hills, and the chateau lit from below, its limestone pale and solid against the dark. The vineyard was invisible beyond the wall. Just a presence you knew was there. The rows of vines and the turned leaves and the empty branches waiting for the next season. She did not stay much longer after that. Her aunt needed to find her driver, and 2 of the guests from table 14 said goodbye with genuine warmth and exchanged information about a restaurant they had mentioned at dinner that Margot would never go to, but appreciated the mention of. The man with the planning dispute found her on the way out, and told her, briefly and with visible relief, that it had been resolved in his favor 3 weeks ago. She told him she was very glad. Edouard was near the gate when she left. He had his jacket over his arm now, the formality of the day partially put away. He looked like a man at the end of something, which was also the beginning of something, which is the particular quality of a very good day. "Safe journey," he said. "And you?" She walked to her car. She did not look back. Not because she was trying not to look back, but because she did not need to. She had the handkerchief in her pocket. She had said all right, twice, in the voice she used for things she actually meant. She had the specific light of September in Burgundy still in her eyes, the way good light stays with you. And she had the sound of the fountain and the red ivy, and the question that had found her behind the chapel wall and opened something she had been keeping closed. Is it the wedding, or something older? Both, she thought now, unlocking her car. It was both. The wedding had simply given the older thing somewhere to go, and the older thing had found its way behind the chapel wall and sat on a stone bench and met someone who did not try to talk it out of itself. She drove back through Beaune, through the streets she had known as a child, past the market square and the old hospital, with its colored tiles, and the bakery that had been there since before she was born, past the road that turned toward her mother's house, which she did not take tonight, but which she looked at as she passed. The window she wanted, the east-facing window, the morning light, and the coffee, and the particular quiet of knowing what kind of day it was going to be before you had to go into it. She did not have that yet, but she had said all right, and she had the handkerchief, and she was, for the first time in quite a long time, genuinely curious about what came next. That was enough for tonight. That was, actually, quite a lot. She drove back toward Paris with the window open a little, because the air in Burgundy in September smells like almost nothing else in the world. Like wine and earth, and something green and something ending and something, underneath all of it, that is beginning. And she wanted to keep it with her as long as she could before the city came back, and the ordinary life came back, and the apartment with the one window that faced a wall. She drove for 20 minutes before she let herself smile. Then she smiled for the rest of the way home. In the weeks that followed, they wrote letters. Not messages, letters. This had been Edouard's suggestion, offered without elaboration, and Margot had agreed without asking him to explain, because she understood without being told that there was a difference between a message and a letter, the same way there was a difference between a fact and a truth. Messages were efficient, letters were intentional. Every word in a letter was chosen, because you could not unsend a letter, and the effort of the choosing was itself a form of honesty. His first letter arrived 9 days after the wedding. 4 pages, dark blue ink. His handwriting was the handwriting of someone who had been taught to write well and had then simply continued doing so, neat without being small. Each letter given its proper space. He told her about the estate in Verneuil, about the house, which was very old and very cold in October, and which he had been arguing with for 11 years, about insulation, about the library, which was the one room that had been finished to his satisfaction. Good light from 3 tall windows, a fireplace that actually worked, shelves that reached the ceiling and required a ladder on rails, which was the kind of luxury that was not luxurious so much as simply correct. About his work, which was managing the land and the people on it, and the 10,000 small decisions that were required to keep a place like that alive in a century that did not require places like that to be alive. He wrote with the same economy he spoke with. No extra words, no performance. Each sentence did something specific, and then stopped. She wrote back. She told him about Paris, the apartment, the wall the window faced, the bakery on the street below that played music in the mornings, and which was either a great comfort or a mild irritation, depending on the day and the music. She told him about her work, which was in textile design, which had started as the thing she was good at, and had become, slowly, over 5 years, the thing she loved. She told him about color in a way she had never explained to anyone before, because most people did not understand that color was not decoration but language, that you could say things with a particular shade of blue or amber that you could not say in words, and she had always thought this was obvious until she met enough people for whom it clearly was not. She told him about her grandmother's garden. She told him, in 4 careful paragraphs, about Luc. Not everything, the shape of it, as she had said behind the chapel, what it had cost her, what she had decided afterward. She wrote it down because she thought he should have it in writing, where it could not be misheard or lost in the telling, and because writing it was the only way she knew to say, here is a thing that matters. Here is why I move carefully. Here is why I asked you if it had been practiced. His reply came 6 days later. He did not address the Luc section directly. What he said was, I will not practice anything I say to you. I will not always say it gracefully, as you have already seen, but I will always say it truly. She read that sentence 3 times. Then she folded the letter and put it with the handkerchief in the drawer of her nightstand, where it remained. They met again in October, in Paris. He came to the city for what he described as obligations, which she had come to understand was his word for things that had to be done, and which he managed without complaint, but without pretending to enjoy. He met her for dinner at a small restaurant near the Seine that he knew and she had walked past several times without going in. Dark wood, small tables, candles that had been used many times and had melted into irregular shapes. He was there when she arrived. This struck her. Not because punctuality was unusual, but because of the quality of it. He was not just on time, but already settled, already at ease in the room, with a glass of water and a book he had put face down when she walked in. She sat down. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" "In Paris," he said, as if this was a complete answer. And she thought about it, and decided it was. She was different in Paris. She was more herself here, in the city she had chosen, in the work she had built, in the ordinary life she had constructed, without anyone else's help. This was Margot on her own terms. "You look different too," she said. "Also in Paris?" "No," she said. "Less in Paris. More," she tried to find it, "more at the edge of the frame, like you are watching the city rather than being in it." He nodded slowly. "That is fair," he said. "Paris is not my city. What is your city?" He thought about it. "I am not sure I have one," he said. "I have a house. That is different." "Is the house yours?" she asked. "Or are you the house's?" The look he gave her then was the look of someone who had been given, unexpectedly, the exact thing they had been looking for. "That," he said, "is the question I have been asking myself for 11 years. They had dinner for 3 hours. Not because the food required 3 hours, though it was very good, but because the conversation required it. The kind of conversation that does not rush because there is nowhere more important to be, that turns corners and doubles back and goes down side streets and always, somehow, finds its way back to the main road. He told her about the architectural drawings he still made, privately, for buildings he would never build. She told him about a textile she was working on, a commission for a restoration project, a historical pattern she was reconstructing from fragments, which required the same thing that his letters did, choosing each element carefully because you could not take it back. He asked about her mother. She told him. She asked about his mother. He told her. And the telling was different from what she had expected. Not complicated, not distant, but careful. The care of a son who loved a woman who was sometimes difficult to love, and who had made his peace with both things. At the end of the evening, outside the restaurant with the September warmth gone and the October air coming off the Seine with teeth in it, he asked if he might call on her properly, which was an old-fashioned way to say it, and she told him so. "It is what I mean," he said, unapologetically. "Then yes," she said, "you may call on me properly." He called on her properly. He came to her apartment on a Saturday morning in late October, with no obligations and a paper bag from the bakery on her street that he had found by the simple method of walking down the street and smelling bread. He had bought too many things. This was the first evidence she had that he was not always as precise as he appeared. She made coffee. He sat at her kitchen table. He looked at the window. "That faces north," he said. "Northwest," she corrected. "There is morning light for about 40 minutes in late summer," she said. "After that it faces the wall." He nodded. He looked at the wall in question. He looked back at her, and something in his expression was very quiet and very deliberate, and he said, "We will find you a better window." It was the same thing he had said at the vineyard, but it was different now. Now it was not a light thing. Now it was a thing that had weight. "We," not "you." And the word "find," used not as a joke, but as a plan. And the window, that was the thing she had described in a letter 6 weeks ago, and which he had apparently been carrying since. She sat down with her coffee. She looked at him across the kitchen table. He looked back at her. "You are thinking about something," she said. "I am always thinking about something," he said. "Something specific," she said. He put his cup down. "I want to be very clear with you," he said, "about what I mean, about what I am asking for, if I am asking for it." He paused. "I am not always good at this. I can manage a 10,000-acre estate and 200 years of family decisions without confusion, but I find that when something is genuinely important to me, I become somewhat imprecise." "I have noticed," she said. She said it kindly. "I think that you are genuinely important to me," he said. "I think this very quickly and without confusion, which is not the usual order of things for me." The kitchen was quiet. The bakery below was playing something. She could hear it faintly, strings of some kind, gentle and unhurried. The wall outside the window was doing nothing, being a wall. "I think the same," Margot said. "I think it not quickly. I think it carefully, which is my usual order of things, and I arrive at the same place." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Good," he said. "Just that. Good." In the voice of a man who had been waiting to say it, and was glad to have finally said it. She drank her coffee. He ate one of the pastries from the bag, and then a second one, and she had known before he arrived that he was the kind of person who would buy too many pastries and then eat them without embarrassment, and she had been right, and this made her unreasonably happy. Outside the window, the October light was making the wall look almost beautiful. November came, December came. They traveled between Paris and Verneuil on weekends, the train through the long fields of Burgundy, going gold, and then brown, and then bare. She saw his library. She was right about the ladder on rails. It was completely the right choice, and she told him so, and he looked pleased in the way people look when they are told that a decision they made alone was a good one. He met her mother. This happened in November, in Beaune, over a lunch that lasted all afternoon. Her mother was small and direct, and had opinions about everything from the soil composition of the local vineyards to the current state of textile manufacturing in France, and she delivered all of these opinions without apology, and then listened to Edouard's responses with genuine interest. He was neither intimidated nor overly careful. He was simply himself, which was, Margot thought, the right choice. Her mother watched him the way she watched everything, closely, with the patience of someone who had been reading people for 60 years and had developed a methodology. At the end of lunch, she excused herself briefly, and while she was gone, Edouard leaned slightly toward Margot and said quietly, "She is going to tell you something specific when I leave." "How do you know?" Margot asked. "She has been composing it for the last hour," he said. "I can see it." Her mother came back, and the afternoon ended, and Edouard drove back toward the autoroute, and her mother watched him go from the doorway. And then she turned to Margot and said, "He looks at you the way your father looked at me." Margot was quiet. "Your father," her mother said, "did not look at me that way immediately. It took him a year. But when it arrived, it was always the same look." She went inside. "That is all I wanted to say." It was snowing lightly in December when Edouard drove to Paris on a Tuesday. Not a weekend, not an obligation, simply a Tuesday, and appeared at her apartment at 3 in the afternoon with the paper bag from the bakery and also a small branch of evergreen from one of the trees near the estate, which he offered to her with no explanation. "It smells like winter in Verneuil," he said. She put it on her kitchen windowsill. They sat at the kitchen table, and the afternoon light came through the window at an angle that reached further in December than it did in October, and it touched the corner of the table, and the corner of the evergreen branch, and the edge of his sleeve, and it was not the morning light from an east-facing window, but it was something. It was the specific quality of a winter afternoon in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cedar and bread. He put something on the table. It was a ring, not large, old gold, deep and warm-colored, with a single stone that was not a diamond. It was something amber, slightly irregular, the kind of stone that had been chosen because it was beautiful and not because it was expensive or correct. "My grandmother's," he said. She was also from Burgundy, also very precise about what she meant, and very impatient with smoothness. Margot looked at the ring. She looked at him. He was not nervous in the way that people perform nervousness. He was simply very still and very present, and looking at her with the same expression she had seen at the vineyard in September, the expression she had not had a name for then, and which she had a name for now. "I am asking you," he said, clearly and without practicing, "if you will marry me." She thought of the chapel in September, and the bench, and the handkerchief, and the vineyard, and the letter with the 4 pages of dark blue ink, and the library with the ladder on rails, and her mother at the doorway, and all the Tuesdays that existed between the first Tuesday and this one. She thought of the window she wanted, the east-facing window, the morning light. She picked up the ring. She put it on. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." Outside, the December light was doing what December light does, arriving low and at an angle, staying only briefly, making everything it touched look as if it were being seen for the last time, and the first time simultaneously. The evergreen branch on the windowsill, the ring on her hand, amber and old, and already the right temperature. The wall outside the window, which would be replaced by a better wall in time, in a house they did not have yet, but which would have a garden and morning light and a window that faced east. She looked at him across the table. He was looking at her. Neither of them said anything. There are moments that do not need words, and this was one of them. A Tuesday in December, in a kitchen on a Paris side street, with a bakery playing something gentle below and a branch of winter green on the windowsill, and 2 people sitting on opposite sides of a small table who had found each other, very quietly, in the back corner of a day that had begun badly and ended well, and who had decided, with all the care and precision they each possessed, that this was the thing they meant. The handkerchief was still in the nightstand drawer. She had not needed it since September. She did not think she would need it again for a very long time, if ever, which was not a thought she had been able to think for 2 years, and which arrived now with the particular weight of something true. Outside, in Burgundy, the vineyard was bare and sleeping. The rows of vines stood empty in the December light, waiting for spring the way all living things wait, not anxiously, not impatiently, but with the steady and ordinary confidence that spring was coming, because it always came, because that was what spring did, because waiting and beginning are not opposites, but parts of the same long, necessary thing. They told people slowly, not because they were secretive, but because some things deserve the chance to be real before they become news. There is a version of happiness that gets worn thin by announcement, by the repeated telling of it, by the way a story becomes its own summary, once enough people have heard it. They were not in a rush to reach the summary. They wanted to stay inside the thing itself for a little while longer. Celeste was first. Margot called her on a Wednesday evening. Her aunt picked up on the second ring and said, before Margot had said anything more than hello, "Tell me." Yes, Margot said. Her aunt made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they have been hoping for arrives, and the hoping has been going on long enough that the arrival of it is almost a relief. "The ring," Celeste said. "Is it beautiful?" "It is old amber," Margot said. "Gold. Irregular. His grandmother's." "His grandmother's," Celeste repeated softly. "He gave you something that has already been loved." Margot had not thought of it in exactly those words, but when her aunt said it, she understood that it was the right description. The ring had been loved before. It had been worn through a marriage that had lasted, and it carried that with it, not as a weight, but as a kind of warmth, the warmth of a thing that knew what it was for. "Yes," Margot said. "He did." They talked for an hour. Her aunt told her things about the Verneuil family she had gathered over the years, pieces of information from that social world that Margot had been adjacent to, but never inside. The way you can live near a country and know its weather without knowing its streets. She spoke of the estate with a kind of reverence that was not about money, but about continuity, about things that had survived long enough to become solid, dependable, real. "You will have to learn some things," Celeste said at the end. "That world has its customs. It is not difficult, once you understand that most of the customs are simply habits that have been going long enough to feel like rules." "And the things that are actually rules?" Margot asked. "You will know them because they are the ones nobody mentions," her aunt said. "The things people are most careful about are always the things nobody says directly." Margot filed this away. She was good at filing things. She told her mother the next day, in person, because her mother was the kind of woman who deserved to hear important things in person, where she could see your face and you could see hers. Her mother was in the kitchen when Margot arrived, making something on the stove that smelled like every winter of Margot's childhood. Onions and herbs and something warm and slow. Margot sat down at the table where she had done homework for 12 years. She put her left hand on the table. Her mother turned from the stove. She looked at the hand. She looked at Margot. She looked at the hand again, and at the amber ring on it, old gold catching the kitchen light. She did not cry. Her mother never cried, not from stoicism, but from the simple fact that her emotion lived in her eyes rather than her face, in the quality of her gaze rather than its expression. What happened in her eyes now was something Margot had seen only a few times in her life, the look of a woman whose particular kind of loving has been answered. "Come," her mother said. She held out her arms. Margot stood up and was held, the way daughters are held by mothers when the holding is not comfort but celebration, when it is not because something has gone wrong, but because something has gone right, which is the better kind of holding, and also the rarer one. "He is a good man," her mother said into her hair. "Yes," Margot said. "I watched him. I know." "He watched you back," her mother said, and it was not the same watching. Margot pulled back to look at her. "What do you mean?" "Most people," her mother said, returning to the stove, "when they watch someone they care for, they watch with something wanting in it, something that takes." She stirred the pot. "He watches you the way you watch something you are glad exists, not taking, just glad." Margot sat back down at the table. She thought about the vineyard path in September, and the way she had felt his attention from across the party, without being able to explain how she had known it was there. Not demanding, not performing, simply present, in the way that good attention is, a hand under a falling thing, ready and quiet. "I know," she said. "Good," her mother said. Now tell me about the ring. Spring came to Verneuil in April, and with it came the first visit that was not a visit, but something that moved toward becoming a home. Margot arrived on a Friday with 2 bags and a box of textile samples and the slight anxiety she still carried into places that were not yet hers. The awareness of being a guest in a space that would one day not be a guest space, which was its own peculiar kind of suspension, like standing in a doorway and not being sure whether to step in or step back. Edouard met her at the door. Not because she needed to be met at the door, simply because he had been listening for the sound of the car on the gravel, which she discovered later from the housekeeper, who mentioned it in the cheerful way that people mention things when they think they are a good sign. He took one of the bags. He did not ask if she needed help with the bags. He simply took one. She followed him inside. The house was exactly as she had imagined from his letters, and entirely different from what she had imagined, which is what houses always are. The photographs her aunt had described as grand were also genuinely lived in, worn in the places where things are always worn, stone floors polished by centuries of feet rather than recent maintenance, a staircase with a banister that had the specific smoothness of a thing touched 10,000 times. The cold that he had written about was real. She felt it as a quality of the air, not unpleasant, the cold of stone and high ceilings and rooms that were genuinely old rather than designed to look it. He showed her the library first. Of course he showed her the library first. It was exactly what he had described and better in person. The 3 tall windows, the fireplace, lit, because it was April in Burgundy, and the evenings were still cold. The shelves from floor to ceiling, and the ladder on its rails, which she immediately wanted to use, and which she used, climbing 3 rungs up to look at the titles at eye level, and then another 3 to look at the titles above those, while Edouard stood below, with his hands in his pockets, and watched her with the expression she had learned to read by now. The one that was quiet and undemanding, and simply glad she was there. "It is better than you said," she told him from the ladder. "You have not seen the window yet," he said. She climbed back down. He guided her to the window on the east wall, the one that looked out over the garden, and beyond it, toward the vineyard on the morning side of the property. She stood at the window. The evening light was going from the garden, leaving only the last of it on the tops of the vineyard rows. The same light she had stood in with him in September. The same particular quality of burgundy light that she had missed without knowing she was missing it, until she had been standing in it again. "In the morning," he said, "this window." She turned to look at him. "East-facing," he said. "The light comes in at about 7 in the spring, earlier in summer." She looked back at the window. She thought about the list she had kept in her head for 2 years of things that were possible in the abstract and unlikely in the specific. The garden, the east-facing window, the morning light and the coffee, and the particular quiet of knowing what the day was going to be before you went into it. She had kept the list not because she believed in it with certainty, but because she believed in it the way you believe in things that are not certain, but that are real. Quietly, persistently, with the low and steady faith of a person who has decided to keep the window open even when it is cold. "You remembered," she said. "I read your letters," he said, simply. They had dinner that evening in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, which existed and was very formal, but the kitchen, which was large and warm and had a table near the window that someone had been eating at for a very long time. The housekeeper, Madame Renaud, had left things on the stove and disappeared with the tact of someone who had worked in this house long enough to know when to be invisible. They ate, They talked. The fire in the kitchen hearth did what fires do. It made the room feel like a room, a specific and enclosed and human place, separate from the dark and cold outside. She told him about the textile commission she was working on, the historical pattern with its missing pieces, the way she had been reconstructing the missing parts not by guessing, but by understanding the logic of the whole. The way a pattern has a grammar, and if you understand the grammar well enough, you can complete the sentence even when words are absent. He listened. Then he said, "That is what I do with the estate." She looked at him. 11 years of managing something I inherited, he said. At first I managed it the way it had always been managed, because that was all I knew. And then slowly I began to understand the logic of it, why certain decisions had been made, what problem each thing had originally been a solution to. And once I understood the logic, I could make new decisions that fit the grammar of the place. He paused. I had not thought of it that way until you said it. She thought about this. Is that why the library is finished? She asked. He looked surprised. What do you mean? You said it was the one room finished to your satisfaction. I think it is the one room that was entirely your decision. Not inherited, not existing, yours. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, slowly. I think that is right. The grammar of who you are, she said, rather than the grammar of the place. He looked at her across the kitchen table. The fire, the amber ring on her hand catching the light, the east-facing window dark now but there, present, waiting for morning. I would like to fill more rooms with that grammar, he said. He said it quietly, not as a grand statement but as something he was discovering as he said it. I think that may be what... He stopped, started again, unpracticed, real. I think that may be what this is, what you are, the grammar of who I actually am, rather than the grammar of what I inherited. She looked at him for a long time. That is the most beautiful thing anyone has said to me, she said. It was not smooth, he said. No, she said. It wasn't. That is why it was beautiful. They sat in the kitchen until the fire was low and the night was properly dark, and Madame Renaud's careful cooking had been entirely consumed, and then they sat a little longer, which is the best kind of sitting, the kind after everything practical has been done, when there is nothing left but the company itself, and the fire, and the particular warmth of being exactly where you are supposed to be. The wedding was the following September. Not because a September wedding was planned for its symbolism, though the symbolism was not lost on either of them. Because September in Burgundy is the most itself that Burgundy gets. The harvest beginning, the light at its most specific and irreplaceable, the air carrying the smell of turned earth and ripe grapes, and the particular dryness that comes before the autumn rain. It was the right time. It was also, though neither of them said this directly, exactly 1 year from the morning she had stood outside a chapel in that same September light and felt the shape of something missing. The chapel at Verneuil was smaller than the one at Beaumont. Stone, older. The ivy on its walls had been growing longer. The guest list was not enormous. Her Aunt Celeste, sitting in the front row with the expression of a woman whose guilt had been entirely resolved. Her mother, beside Celeste, in a dress the color of warm cream, not crying but with that quality in her eyes. Edouard's mother, in pearl, on the other side of the aisle, who had, over the course of a year and several dinners, and one particularly decisive afternoon conversation in the garden at Verneuil, arrived at something that was not quite warmth, but was adjacent to it, and growing steadily in that direction. Friends, colleagues, people from the estate who had known Edouard for years, and who looked at him today with the specific satisfaction of people who have been watching someone be a certain kind of person for a long time and are glad to see that person recognized. Margot wore a dress the color of old ivory, not white, ivory, which was warmer, which had some age in it, which was the color of the handkerchief she had kept in her nightstand drawer since September of the year before. She carried no flowers. She had asked Edouard, weeks before, if this would be acceptable. He had looked at her and said, "Carry whatever you want to carry." She had decided she wanted to carry nothing, to have her hands free, which was a practical preference, but also something more than practical. The preference of a woman who wanted to walk into the chapel, the same person she would walk out of it, carrying only herself. She walked in on her mother's arm. This, too, had been a decision. Her father had died when she was 11, which was long enough ago that it was not grief, but simply the particular shape of her family, a shape that had her mother at its center, dependable and present, and the person who had handed her everything she carried into this day. It was right that her mother should bring her in. Edouard was at the altar. He was wearing the suit she had expected and standing in the way he always stood. The quality of stillness, the presence, the sense of a person who was fully in the room he was in. But something about him today was different. It took her until she was halfway up the aisle to identify it. He was not managing anything. Every other time she had seen him in a formal or social context, the wedding where they had met, the dinners, the evenings with their families, there had been some part of him that was professionally present, handling the event as a thing to be navigated, not dishonestly, simply with the awareness of a person accustomed to being watched. Today he was not handling anything. He was simply standing at the altar watching her walk toward him, and his face was entirely his face, with nothing managed about it. It was the most she had ever seen of him at once. She walked to him. Her mother released her arm. She stood in front of him. He took both her hands. The priest spoke. The words were old and good, the kind that have been used so many times they have lost all self-consciousness and become simply what they mean: vows, promises, the particular form of trust that decides to be permanent. The light came through the chapel windows and made rectangles on the stone floor, and the guests were still, and outside the vineyard was doing what it always did in September, being gold and full and exactly itself. When it was time for him to speak, Edouard spoke. He had not written a long speech. He had written one sentence, which he delivered looking at her without looking down, because he had not needed to write it down to remember it. "I will find you the window," he said, "and I will be there in the morning when the light comes through it." She looked at him. She did not cry. Not here. Not this time. The crying had been done a year ago, behind a different chapel wall, in the particular grief of something missing, and it had been real, and it had been necessary, and it was done. "I know you will," she said. And she meant it the way she meant things when she meant them truly, quietly, completely, without performance, with the full weight of a person who has learned to be careful and has decided, carefully, to be certain. The priest concluded the ceremony. They walked out of the chapel into the September light, into the sound of people who loved them, into the particular smell of Burgundy in harvest, warm stone and turned earth and something green and something golden, and the vineyard running away down the hill in long, perfect rows. She had the handkerchief in the small pocket of her dress, the one the seamstress had added when she asked for it. She had not told Edouard it was there. She did not think she would need it. She had put it there because it was the beginning of the story, and she wanted it present at the end of this part of it, and carried forward into whatever part came next. He took her hand. She held it. The September light came over the vineyard and landed on the stone walls of the chapel, and on the formal garden, and on all the people gathered there. And it was the same light it had always been, specific, unrepeatable, the exact shade of late morning in Burgundy, in the last days before autumn fully arrived. It would come again tomorrow. It would come every September, over the same vineyard, through the same air, finding whatever it found, and making it briefly and specifically beautiful. That was enough. That was, in every way that mattered, more than enough.